Hello, everyone. Welcome to our webinar, Using Sprint Retrospectives, Even Without Scrum. While we're waiting for a few more people to join, feel free to put where you're from in the chat, and let's see where everybody's joining us from. I see Ohio, India, Pennsylvania, Texas. Is anybody in Colorado? That's where I'm at. I'll kick us off while people are still joining. My name's Renee. I'm a Scrum Alliance team member, and I'm really happy to be here for the Using Sprint Retrospectives Even Without Scrum webinar. We'll just hop right in. So some of you joining might be Scrum Alliance members, but some of you also might not know of Scrum Alliance. So we are a not-for-profit Agile certifying company. We work all over the world. We partner with world-class trainers, and we provide in-demand professional certifications. We were established in 2001, which makes us, if not the oldest, one of the oldest Agile certifying companies. And over that time, we have awarded over 1,008,700, sorry, I'm messing up the numbers, but over about 1,800,000 certifications. And our mission is to advance real-world agility by equipping and inspiring the change maker in everyone. Our member benefits include access to our learning journey, our global community. We have regional Scrum gatherings along with global Scrum gatherings, so our community gets benefits for having discounts to those. We also have a retrospective tool, and you also get access to our comparative agility tools. For everybody that is a member as well, we just released our new badge design. So if you haven't seen them yet and you are a member, check your emails. We encourage that you share your new badge with us. We've been celebrating them all over our social channels. So make sure to tag us if you do share them. And then this is just the intro to the console. On the left hand of your screen is where you can ask questions. Those will be saved and categorized for our QA. That'll be at the end of the webinar. Right here is where you have some resources. Today we have today's slides, and we also have a booklet that Joe is sharing with all the attendees, so you can download it there. And then as you found, the attendee chat is next to it. And then you can add reactions to different slides at any time throughout the webinar. So click on the smiley face button and tell us how you're feeling about the slide or what's going on. And I will hand it over to Jo to introduce herself.
Excellent. Thanks so much, Renee. Hi, everybody, and welcome to this webinar. I'm Jo, and I'm coming to you from South Africa, Johannesburg, South Africa. I see there's some South Africans here. How's it? Shout out to all the South Africans, but also shout out to everybody who's joining from all over. It's so exciting to see so many people coming from all over the world. I'm going to chat to you today about retrospectives, which is one of my favorite topics. So I am a certified Scrum trainer and also a certified enterprise coach. And I have my own consultancy, and I also work with Upgrad Knowledgehut, and I do training for them. At the moment, I'm working with lots of different teams, but over the past, 15 years, I've worked with teams in so many different industries and so many different contexts. And I've done lots and lots of retrospectives. And retrospectives are close to my heart, and I'm very passionate about them. And so I'm always wanting to share different ways for you to help improve your retrospectives, make them better, think about them differently, or just learn new methods. And so today I'm going to share with you a little bit about what are retrospectives, what are they about, and what's the goal of a retrospective. Then I'm going to share a nice 5-stage process for retrospectives. So 5-stage process that comes from the book on retrospectives by Esther Derby and Diana Larson. There is a new version of that book, which I'll share with you as well. So I'll take you through the 5 stages. Then I'll take you through some thinking about how you want to plan a good retro. What do you need to do in order to really plan a good retro? I'll give you a nice example of how a plan might look. So just a quick example of what a plan might look like. And then we're going to talk a little bit about facilitation. So what does it mean to facilitate a retro? I think an important part of retrospectives is also the facilitation part, right? And paying attention to the facilitation part. So I'm going to share a little bit about facilitation and the facilitation part of retrospectives and what's important about that. And then we will close and we'll make some time for questions. So we'll have a nice chunky amount of time for questions. Alrighty, so let's dive into today's awesome content. All right, so what are retrospectives about? I'm so glad you asked that question, because that is a great question to ask. Also, I have a lot of very bad jokes. And so I'll share my very bad jokes with you as we go, but you don't have to laugh. Okay, so what are retrospectives about? For me, I think they're one of the most powerful events in the Scrum framework. And even if you're not using Scrum, you can still create space to retro no matter what you're doing. And they can be so effective. So it's really our opportunity to look back at a time box, and we can just decide what that time box looks like for ourselves. And then have a look at all the things that happened, think about a focus for that, share some data and get some shared perspective, and then start looking for ways to improve. What can we do differently? What can be better? Now, in the world of projects, I think that sometimes at the end of a project, we have a project retrospective. And I think that sometimes we're missing an opportunity, because often a project retrospective, there's a lot of lessons learned, but unless we're doing that same project, exactly the same project again, a lot of the time we can't apply those lessons learned. And so they kind of get lost along the wayside. Whereas even if we're doing projects, even if we just retro for every 2 weeks or once a month or even every 6 weeks, depending on what you're doing and what you're building, that can still be so helpful at creating ways to improve your process. So retrospectives are so powerful in that aspect, in that they're not just for people doing Scrum, they are for people for doing everything. In fact, a friend of mine is working with a small group of developers, and what they do is they work in Pomodoros, 25-minute time boxes. And at the end of every Pomodoro, they have a mini retrospective. And it's really, really cool. And all they're asking themselves is whether they were in flow and what they can do to get better at being in flow. So even if you're just working in 25-minute increments, you can still have a very short, and they just have a 5-minute retrospective at the end of their 25-minute increment. So there's so many different and amazing opportunities and ways to do retrospectives. Okay, so where are we going next? So retros are a mechanism to help your team understand different points of view. The way that I'm going to share them, it also is about following a natural order of thinking. So it's very interesting. The way we think and the way we problem solve, if we use that as a mechanism for running our retrospectives, then it makes the problem solving and the looking for generating ideas so much easier. So we're going to follow a natural order of thinking. We're going to have a look at how retros can help us take a comprehensive look at the team's methods and practices and how they work, and then think about ways to allow discussions to go where they need to go, and then get to a point where we've got concrete action steps. So things that we're doing that are going to be helpful for the next iteration, or, you know, for tomorrow, or for whatever the kind of time frame or time period is that we're working with. So I'm going to share 5 stages with you. So the 5 stages of retrospectives come from Agile Retrospectives, Making Good Teams Great. So this is actually the 2nd edition of the book. I'm going to give it a shameless plug here because it is a very, very, very brilliant book, and it's definitely worth investing in as a resource. You know, I still flip through this when I need ideas for new retros, or just to kind of keep things fresh and alive and exciting. But let me tell you a little bit about the 5 stages. So Essa and Diana wrote about the 5 stages in their first book. And the first stage and the last stage are really about great facilitation, right? So the stage 1 and stage 5 are really about how do we bring great facilitation into our retrospectives? And then stages 2, 3, and 4 are really about how people think and problem solve. So to what I was speaking about earlier, this is how we bring the thinking process of humans into a retrospective. So let's share a little bit about each stage. All right, stage 1 is about opening the retrospective. It's called Set the Stage. So in stage 1, we want to make sure that we are making space for all the voices in the room. So creating a way for people to check in, or to be heard, or share a thought, something short and sweet, and connecting, you know, connecting either to the retro topic or connecting to each other, or some way to get into the space. It's also our opportunity to create safety. So to share with the people, you know, we've got if you're a Scrum Master, you know, make sure your team knows that you've got an agenda, you know what you're doing, you know how long you're going to be here and what the outcomes are. So really kind of creating a container. If meetings are invisible containers, it's the set the stage part is really about investing in creating a great container for collaboration, a great container for effective communication and interaction. All right. And so that's the first stage. An important thing to think about during the first stage is maybe it's also a place where you want to create working agreements for the meeting, right? Because if you don't have any working agreements, then, you know, it's helpful to be able to start somewhere, because that's part of what creating safety looks like, right? How are we going to be in this session? What is important to us? How are we going to talk to each other? What does respect look like? All of those kind of simple rules that can be so effective at setting tone for whatever you're going to do next. So that's really what the first stage is about. Then stage 2 is about gathering data. All right. Now, I often see, and myself as a young Scrum Master, I used to miss this stage because I wanted to get to the juicy bits, you know, sometimes, or I wanted to ask people what went well and what didn't go well. But when we're asking them what went well and what didn't go well, then we're asking for opinions in the absence of data, okay? And what we really want is we want a shared perspective and a shared view of all the things that have happened, and then we can generate insights from that shared view. But when we've got nothing that's shared and we don't have that shared perspective, then we're all generating insights from a different place. We're generating insights from our own perspective and not from shared meaning or shared sense making. So gathering data phase is so critical to being able to create shared meaning for everybody. Now, sometimes it can be helpful to bring data in from whatever happened in the sprint, right? Sometimes you can bring in the actual user stories or features or tasks that a team worked on. Sometimes you can bring in some of their metrics. What's the team been doing? How have they been doing? Sometimes you could bring in their technical practices as a way for them to look at and investigate their technical practices. So many different ways to think about and bring data into the room, but it's so critical to do it because it's really what creates that shared perspective. So bringing data in is the first step. Okay, once we've got great data, then we can say, okay, cool. What is the data telling us? So now we can use that data to generate insights about what might be happening for a team. What are some opportunities for improvement, or digging into some root causes for problems that might be surfacing over and over and over again, right? So, often I see that we ask the 3 questions: what went well, what didn't go well, but we ask the same 3 questions in the same ways, sometimes over and over. And then we get the same answers in the same ways. And so, we need to think about, okay, hang on a second. If we're getting the same answers, then maybe we need to change how we're asking the questions and what we want to know. So the cool thing about when we've got data is we can start looking for patterns. So we can ask pattern questions. We can ask questions like, what do you notice that's the same? What do you notice in general? What do you notice except for? So what are exceptions that you might be noticed? What is surprising about what you notice? All of these different kinds of things that can start a kind of digging into patterns, looking for things that might be going wrong, understanding what's really, really happening. So it's very important. When I was starting out as a Scrum Master and I learned about the 5 stages, I would use the 5 stages, and I was kind of good at doing that. But what I wasn't really great at was linking, gathering data to generating insights. And I think that's another critical part that we need to make sure that we're doing, right? So that we're generating insights on the data we've gathered, and not just doing another random exercise that generates insights, but those two are disparate, So when I was a young Scrum Master, I did that a few times, and then I was not really getting great outcomes. And I thought to myself, must be something that I'm doing wrong. And I had a look and I was like, oh, that's what I'm doing wrong. I'm not using my data to create insights. So we really want those things to follow on from each other. That's the important thing. Okay. Stage 4. So once we've got some great insights, now is the opportunity to really start diving in, right? So diving into the options that are now presented, to start thinking about, okay, cool, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? So if we've got great insights, we can then choose from those insights, okay, what do we want to do something about? Okay, what do we want to do something about? And then what specifically are we going to do? And so here the team can generate ideas. For me, what I try to get teams to do is not just have one solution, and I learned this from Esther as well, is what you're looking for is at least like 3 options for the same problem, right? If we've got 3 options or 3 different ways to solve the problem, then we probably really, really understand the problem. But if we don't, then maybe we don't understand the problem that well, right? If we've only got 1, then we've got no options. And if we've got 2, then we've got a dilemma. But if we've got 3, then we've got options. And I find often that having options prevents the me versus you, and I'm right and you're wrong, and my idea versus your idea situations, So because now we've got 3 different ways of solving this problem, or 3 different directions that we can go. And sometimes it's 3 different things that we want to experiment with or test out. And sometimes it's just a deep insight that we've had. Okay, so now we want to choose what are we going to do? And sometimes doing nothing is what we're going to do, and that's okay. But we need to make sure that we choose, because when we're making decisions and when we're getting to outcomes, then that means that we're getting energy. When we just kind of let it fizzle and we're like, oh, that's when retros start not adding value. And that's when our teams are like, we do the same thing and we ask the same questions and blah, 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 and nothing happens and I don't see the value in this. And then they don't want to come anymore. Please can we cancel the retrospective? So that's the thing. We want to make sure we're adding value. And then finally, 5 is really about closing the retrospective. So here's our opportunity. I call it tying a bow on whatever we're doing, right? We want to make sure that we know who's responsible for what actions, okay? And what I didn't say when we decide what to do is you don't want to decide on 100 things. Like pick 1, maybe 2, and that's it, you know, pick one or two. And then in the stage 5, make sure, and in stage 4, make sure that you've got ownership for those actions, that it's not the Scrum Master that's owning those actions, that somebody's put their hand up. And, you know, sometimes I notice that there's these actions that are, we're going to communicate better, and it's the whole team. And I'm like, okay, well, that's great, but that's not really something we can do really effectively, right? We need to decide what about our communication needs to change. Does it need to be more frequent? Does it need to be less frequent? Is it that we're going to WhatsApp each other, or that we're going to talk to each other, or that we're going to share updates? Or what about our communication needs to improve? And then who's going to help remind us to do it? So yes, everybody's going to do it, but sometimes we need a champion, someone who can just be like, I'm going to remind us every day, or I'm going to schedule the event that needs to happen because we're going to unpack this thing more, or I'm going to, whatever it is, we've got somebody who's going to take ownership of that. And I've tried for it to not always be the Scrum Master, because we want to, like, you know, teams starting to problem solve for themselves, right? So not always the Scrum Master is the one owning the outcomes. And then finally, when we close, we want to recap, what did we decide? Okay, who's doing it? Thank everybody for their time, because I think to appreciate each other for our time investment is also so valuable. And then, you know, ask for some feedback. What could make this retro better? You know, what could make this retro better? So I'll often end on appreciations. I'll get people in the team to appreciate each other for something that happened, either write it as a sticky note or share it, depending on how many people there are and how much time we have, those kinds of things. Because I find that that's often an awesome way to like lift spirits and help people to be awesome. So those are the 5 stages. Now, I love the 5 stages because I think that they're really, really important and a great way to help teams think through. I also think that, you know, sometimes that's not what the team needs. So another factor of retrospectives is, first of all, understanding what is it that this team needs right now? What is going on with this team so that I can effectively prepare a retrospective that speaks to what do they need. So that's what we're going to think about next. All right. So how to plan a good retro. So first, like I said, we need to know what is happening with our team. I've got, excuse me for 1 second, there's a tissue. I just need a tissue quickly. Apologies, everybody. All righty, we're back. So starting with what is happening for the team is a helpful place to start, right? And if you don't know a team well enough, or you don't really know what's happening for a team, then there are some retros that you can run that will give you a lot of information and still possibly help a team. So, you know, if you don't know, that's okay. It doesn't mean that you don't have to do a retro, but understanding what's happening helps you to create focus, right? And helps you to start thinking about what is the thing that's going to add the most value to this group right now. And so as a Scrum Master, that's where I used to start. What's happening for this team? What do they need? So one of the people that I used to work with in my old company, we've got a coaches group that we still speak to, and she put on the coaches group something around helping people build trust. And so, you know, that was such a cool example. A lot of the coaches gave her really great ideas and really great insights about what she could do to enable trust. But that's something super important, right? If my team doesn't trust each other, what's something that I could do in the retrospective to start building trust? Because we can't have great conversations if we don't trust each other. And so all of our retro thinking is just going to be very surface. So thinking about what needs to happen for a team is a great place to start. And then you need to, once you know that, then you need to invest some time. You need to think about, okay, cool, how much time do I have for my retrospective? What activities am I going to do for each of those stages? What are the time boxes that I'm going to give? And then I like to think, I call it dreaming into. So I kind of start to picture if I'm going to do this activity, what are these people going to say, and what might the sticky notes say? And because we're never going to know, right? So we need to have a great plan, and then we need to be able to adapt our plan, or dance, as I say, dance with what's happening in the room. But the first part is to have a great plan, right? So that we know what we're going to do and we're increasing the chances of getting to great outcomes, which is really the most important part, right? What is the outcomes that we're after, and what are we doing here? So investing the time is very, very helpful. Here is, and I'm just going to kind of flash on this. So here's an example of a 90-minute retro with some timing and some ideas for what to do. So I like to think about, batching my time up into, like short amounts of time for the setting the stage. You just want to quickly do that, gather data, depending on how many people and how long you're retroing back to, can take a little bit of time. So between 30 and 50%. Then, generating insights, you want to really invest in the generating insights portion. Sometimes I'll actually do less investment in gather data, try get some of the data beforehand, and then I've got more space to invest in generating insights. I think that's actually where we want to invest a little bit more of our time. And then, deciding what to do and closing the retro. All right. So, I like to plan with a little bit of a buffer, because you never know what's going to happen. So having a buffer of 5, 10, 15 minutes, whatever it is helpful, because then you've got room to maneuver. So then you can invest that extra time in the generating insights, or, whatever you need a little bit more time in. In the past, I've made the mistake of creating wonderful, exciting, and sometimes fun things to do in the set the stage. But then what happened was I invested like 25 to 30 minutes in a set the stage of a 1 hour retro, which wasn't really great, right? So just make sure that you're planning your retro so that you're investing time in the right places, which is really important. Then I want to chat a little bit about facilitation. So thinking about facilitation is really, really important. So there's a couple of important principles, or just general facilitation principles, for when you're thinking about facilitating a retro. So the first facilitation principle is that as the facilitator of a retrospective, you want to be neutral. So every retrospective needs to have a neutral facilitator. Excuse me. And if it's not you, if you're a team member that wants to have a retro, even if you've planned the retro because you know what the team needs, and even if you have come up with a great plan, find somebody else who can facilitate it so that they can be neutral and you can participate fully. It's really important to have that neutral facilitator, someone who's not tied to the individuals or the specific outcomes, but just to getting to an outcome that is great for the team. So that's the first thing. Second thing you want to think about is you want to create a facilitation plan that enables different thinking styles, right? So people think and process information in different ways. Some people need to talk to think, alrighty? They're not thinking if they're not talking. So they think out loud. And some people need to think first and then talk. And so it's important to be able to make space for both of these different aspects. Alrighty, are the people who need to talk so that they can think, and the people who need to think first. And so there's lots of different ways you can do that. One of the things that I like to do is I like to use sticky notes and get people to think first, write their thoughts on sticky notes, give them a nice amount of time for thinking. And then the thinkers can do their thinking. And then you can share a little bit about what's going on, and some of the people who need to talk to think can talk out loud. Another way to do it is to, create spaces where we just pause, just like create silence in the retrospective. because just creating silence for a couple of minutes allows people who are processing information and still thinking about something just to catch up, just to catch up with whatever's being said, and so that they can also have time to process. The thinkers will, keep thinking. So Nancy Klein has got a whole lot of cool ways to doing this in her thinking environment work, the book A Time to Think. And there's lots of other mechanisms that we can use that create space for different types of communicators. The other thing we want to think about is that some people are detailed thinkers, and some people are highlights packet or detailed kind of, they think and need lots of detail, and some people are more like highlights package, right? Give me 2 sentences or less and I know what's going on. So we also need to figure out how we can balance both of those things in a retrospective and make space for that. Because also, sometimes the highlights package people aren't listening to the detailed thinkers because they already know what you mean. So I stop listening to what you say. So, creating mechanisms so that we're actually hearing each other and starting to understand each other and appreciate that we are different, and that those differences are they're part of what makes us a great team, right? Because if we were all the same, then we would just get all the same stuff and it would be a little bit boring. So thinking about those things is really important, and thinking about how you're going to facilitate that is really important. Then again, in the beginning, creating a great container, right? So making sure that there's safety in the room, that people know how to participate, that they know why they're there, and they know what the outcomes are that we're trying to achieve. So we've got good purpose and great outcomes. Those are really, really important things to think about when we start thinking about facilitation and how we're going to facilitate. I'm trying to think of if I've forgotten anything from a facilitation perspective. The other thing that I love is actually comes from Norman Kurth, which is the retrospective prime directive. It's a great way to set the scene for a retrospective, because it really does help with creating safety, and it really does help to create a nice container where magic can happen, right? And we can do cool things. So another really important thing. Okay, so a few other things to think about. So sometimes if we've got tough conversations to have in our retro, we can start with something like appreciations or something that's awesome. And it can be super helpful in, starting us off on a great foot and in a frame of mind where we're really kind of focused on the problems. Alrighty, that's the other thing. It's so important as to make sure that we're keeping focus on problems and not letting our retros fall into a blame game about, this person did this and that person did that, and none of that is helpful. We want to really make sure we focus on problems. So then it's important to make sure that everybody's participating. So create space for people to participate. But what I notice is that some people want to force everybody to participate, and I don't think that's helpful either. So, we need this balance where, there's the opportunity for everybody, that we cater for different thinking styles. But if some people have got nothing to add, maybe they've just got nothing to add, and that's also okay. They're there and they're listening, and maybe they don't have a new thought, but they're happy with what's happening. So, just create that space, but without the pressure. Then remember, again, to link that data that we gathered to the generated insights to, so that we can make sure that we're following a thread and that we're digging deeper into things that have happened. I like to say, have a plan and then have a backup plan, okay? Because you never know what's going to happen. Things can go wrong. So have a plan and have a backup plan. And then as you gain experience, your toolbox is going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and it's going to be so easy to create a backup plan. So don't worry too much, but I like to always have just in the back of my head, oh, if this exercise doesn't work, then I'm going to try this. And if this thing doesn't work, then, then I've got, options and a few choices as I see who's in the room and what's happening. Then, you want to think about a little bit of variety. So if you do the same things over and over again, you're going to get the same results. And that is a problem. So, so think about asking different questions. Think about using slightly different exercises. Think about trying different things, because trying those different things is going to get you, different outcomes. So an example is, every now and again, well, I like to use timelines as a way to just understand what's happening for a team, and get a timeline as a way to get data all into the room. And that's a great way to understand all the things that might have happened in a 2-week iteration or a month iteration or whatever it is, and start really using those things to notice patterns, and then start looking for ways to improve that, right? And then I like to change that up with something like a starfish exercise or a radar chart exercise, where we're looking at gathering data about what are all the wastes we notice. We can bring the lean wastes in, and we can start to see what are the wastes we've got in our team, and let's rate our process against lean waste or something like that. Or let's rate our technical practices and understand all the different things that we do, and let's see how good we are at all of these things and what we might want to change. So there's loads of different ways we can start thinking about how do we improve, and what can we do, and we can create focus for each of those things. And then remember that our big goal here is to think about how we can enable a team to improve, right? That's the big goal. That's what we're trying to do. And so it's important to make sure that we're doing that, and that also that there's visibility of those improvements. I'm not a huge fan of sharing everybody's retro outcomes all the time. But I know that in lots of organizations that happens. But what I am a fan of is making sure that people are noticing and understanding how a team is improving, because I think that's worth sharing. This is where we came from, and this is where we are now. And look at all of these things that we've done that have that have deliberately improved us over time. So we've got ways of noticing all the things that we've done over time. This portion is just a whole lot of really, really cool tools. If you download the workbook, then there's links to all of the things. Some of them are facilitation, some of them are retro-specific. They're all really awesome and really helpful, and I use them all the time. And now we have time for some questions.
All right. Great presentation. Thank you so much. So to begin, there was a lot of questions about the book and the workbook and where to find it. So it's going to be linked on the console right next to the chat. It says Retro Workbook. Hopefully everybody can find that. If not, we will include it in our follow-up email as well with the recording. So check your emails along with the slides and the recording of the email. And then also an SEU link will also be emailed to you. So to jump into more of the technical questions, we might not get to all questions as well, but we'll try. So let's see. So first one, I am a new Scrum Master, 2 months for a development team. Some of the team members do not like retrospectives, even from me joining. They want to cancel them and roll them into sprint planning. Thoughts on the best way we could work through those issues?
That's a really, really great. That's a really great question. I noticed that a lot, and I have a few options. So there's some great ideas in the Agile Retrospective books specifically for that scenario. So check that out as well if you want to. And then I'm going to just share some ideas. So some of the time, what I'll do is I will let a team cancel their retrospectives and not have them. And then what I notice is that there's no space for that team to ever connect and talk and think about and solve their problems. And so what happens is that all of the other interactions that they have become quite difficult because they haven't made space to clear the things out that they need to clear out. And so you'll start a planning, for example, with like a whole conversation about something else that needed to be solved here and something else that needed to be solved there, and all of these kinds of things. So sometimes what I do is I say, okay, cool, like let's not do retros for 2 sprints and see. And then when those things start to pop up and surface, then I'll start to make sure that they understand that, hey, that conversation that we're having right now, instead of having sprint planning, this is a conversation that we really want to be having in a retrospective. And that's what retrospectives are for, so that we can create space to solve some of the interpersonal issues, or the team things, or the dynamics that aren't working, or our process questions, or whatever the case may be. And so sometimes, that is something that you can do. So, you can do it for a little while. And then what I start to do is reintroduce them in a different way. So sometimes it's also because, they've been doing the same thing in the same way with the same outcomes, and none of those outcomes have been valuable. So one other thing that you can think about is asking the team to just trust you and just say, hey, I'm going to try some new things. Please, can we just keep going with this? And if you're not finding any value, then, then we'll have another discussion. But let's just keep hanging there with me for, the next 4 sprints, and let's see how we go. And each time, I'll get your feedback about how we can make this better, and I'll get your feedback about what's happening. So that's another thing that I really like to do. So I like to do that, try and get their buy-in for, just hang in there and let's see how we can improve. Another thing that I've done is I've done a retro on the retros. So I've going a bit meta, right? Let's retro our retros and let's understand why they aren't giving us value and what we want to change and how we can improve them. So I've done that quite often as well. So maybe some of those are some ideas that you can use.
Awesome, thank you. So there was a couple questions that came in around data and where to generate in these data or these insights from. And then if you can't get that data, whether it's out of your control, what to do if you don't have solid data.
Great questions. So data can be qualitative or quantitative, right? So sometimes data can be stuff that you bring into a retro, and sometimes data can just be can be generated within the retro. So a question that I might ask to generate data sometimes, or to gather data, is using a timeline. I might ask the team to write on sticky notes all the things that have happened over the past 2 weeks, if that's a 2-week sprint, for example. And then, and I get them to write as many things as they can remember. So everything from events to, so maybe it's sprint planning and, that happened. And maybe we had a refinement session that happened. And maybe it's as mundane as those things. But often what'll happen is other things will pop up, maybe someone, got married, or someone went on holiday, or someone wasn't there when they were supposed to. And so all of these little things pop up, and it gives us quite an interesting shared perspective over a 2-week period. And, based on that, we can actually start to notice a lot of things. Are there lots of sticky notes about the build breaking, for example? Did the build break every 2 days? Are there lots of sticky notes about how the test environment was down? Are there lots of sticky notes about how we had a production issue to sort out? Are there, so all of these different kinds of things can give us signals for things that might be happening and share patterns. So that's one way that you can just generate data in your retrospective. Another, and then there's so many other ways you can bring data in. So, some data is the actual stories you worked on, or the features. Bring those in and ask about them. Looking at all of this work that we've done this sprint, which of these things did we finish? Which of these things did we not finish? Which of these things were difficult? Which of these things were easy? Which of these things gave huge technical problems to us that we didn't anticipate? Which of these things were surprised? So we can ask so many great questions based on the things that we worked on even. So even just that. Sometimes we can bring in things we measure. Maybe we've got stuff that we measure. Sometimes we can bring in a qualitative assessment of our technical practices. What are the technical practices we do? Let's rate ourselves. Do we pair program? Do we ensemble program? Do we have continuous integration? Do we have all these different kinds of ways to assess what we do. And if you're not a development team or a software team, what are the other practices that you do that are helpful that you can, then start to look at? Do we do unit testing, and how would we rate ourselves? Oh, we're terrible at test-driven development. Oh, why don't, do we want to improve that? All different kinds of things. Yeah. So I hope that was a little bit helpful.
Yeah. And when we use this data, sometimes people can go on the offensive, or we can play a little bit of the blame game. So how do you steer clear of that and people getting blamed for things or feeling blamed?
Yeah, that's a really, really great question. I think it's so easy to head down that blame game route. And I think it's so important to make sure that we're keeping on focusing on the problem. So, when you hear people talking about somebody referring to so-and-so did this or so-and-so did that, get them to take the name out of the equation and to focus on what happened. What happened? What's the problem we're solving? The build broke is the problem we're solving. Whether it was, this person A or person B or person X or person C is irrelevant. The thing that happened is what we want to solve for. So what's the event that happened? What are the facts that are out there? What are the observable things? Let's take people's names out of it and focus on the facts and the observable things that happened. Often, we don't want to dismiss people's feelings because they had those feelings and those feelings are valid. So we don't want to be super dismissive, but we do want to make sure that we're not letting that become the only thing that happened, right? We want to focus on what is the problem that we're solving and shift away from blaming people. So sometimes it can be quite tricky, but I do notice that it's not that difficult when you just look at, okay, cool. So you can extract the facts out of a lot of these kinds of things. Right. So, yeah.
Do you have any resources or advice for creating trust on a team?
Great question. So I think one of the best things I read was Patrick Lencioni's 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, and that speaks to building trust as one of the dysfunctions. Teams that having trust is one of the dysfunctions. And then he's got some quite specific exercises that you can do. I think, sometimes it's baby steps. So the first thing that I try to do is I try to get people to connect as humans. So getting people to understand each other as humans is a helpful way of building trust. So even small exercises where we get to know each other. Who are you outside of this box of developer that I'm putting you in, or tester, or team member A, or marketing person, or whatever it is, whatever kinds of teams we're working on? Who are you, as a human? So creating connection with people is helpful. That's the first way. And then there's lots of other little things that we need to do, because trust is a huge thing, right? It's not just it's trusting. Teams need to learn to trust each other's capabilities, right? Mm-hmm. And to trust each other's skills, and to trust that we're going to do what we say we're going to do, and when we say we're going to do it. So all of these are things that we can build up over time, getting people to work together, pairing sometimes on things. That's also a way to build trust. That takes time, and some people are really good at it and some people hate it. And sometimes, you can start with baby steps, but that's also a helpful thing. Then there's another great exercise that I love called the marketplace of skills, which is a really great exercise that kind of shares a little bit about all the team members. What are their skills within the team, but also what are their skills outside of the team? So we learn a little bit more about each other. And then you do a sharing of, who's, I agree with that. And I love those kinds of, those things that you do. And here's some things that you do that I've also noticed, those kinds of things. Yeah. I'm seeing lots of thumbs down. So people, I guess, don't like the market of skills. I'm a big fan though. And then what else? I think, then it's up to you to also just think about what are those other ways in which you can get people to learn to trust each other's capabilities and to show up for each other. So yeah, so those are important things.
Very good. Would you ask for feedback about the retro on the spot in a follow-up message, or anything similar to that?
So I like to ask for a little bit of feedback about the retro at the end of the retro. So I'll ask questions like, what would you add? Or what did you like about this and what would make it better? Or what ideas do you have for our next retrospective? Or any of those small things that can just create, like, maybe it doesn't go through all 5 of the phases for the next retro, but we've already got a lot of data and a lot of stuff in the room. So you can kind of ask what would improve this? What would make this better?
And should there be an anonymous aspect to retros?
That's a good question. I'm not a fan of anonymity, because I feel like it creates a place for people to hide. And, that what the internet gave us is, trolls. And it's very easy to say something when I don't have to own my opinion on something. And so while I understand that some people don't feel safe to share their views on a topic, or they don't feel safe to express themselves in certain ways, let's solve that problem. Let's rather make it safe for them to express themselves, or help them to figure out how to express themselves, or whatever the case may be. But anonymity for me just creates a way for people to say things without us being able to understand if it's on a sticky note and we don't actually understand what they mean, and now it's anonymous, we'll never know. So everybody's making assumptions about what something may or may not mean without any clarification. So for me personally, I don't find it helpful, and I don't think that I don't love it as a practice. I don't think it's super healthy.
Awesome. And then if you have a team member that during retros, they always think everybody should have their same opinion or think the way they do, and can't really see others' point of views, how would you deal with that?
I think it's really hard, because some people are able to see another perspective and some people aren't always. So it's tricky, because the thing is, we can't change other people. So what can we do is we can create ways for there to be options in the room, ways for the team to decide, working agreements that creates decision-making frameworks where we can decide together, viewpoints that share that there might be other perspectives that this person is missing, small encouragements for, hey, how did you notice that? Or I might ask questions about, what did you hear so-and-so say? Or what meaning did you make from that, to try and understand what are they hearing and what meaning they're making from something that somebody else said. But I think that, when there's people that are stuck in their own thinking and they can't see past their own thinking, that can sometimes be really, really difficult. And that's like a whole bigger conversation that can't always be solved in a retro, with a retro.
Right. That is tricky. How can we measure the effectiveness of a retrospective?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think that for me, measuring the effectiveness of retrospectives is measuring the collective effectiveness of a team over time, right? How is that team improving? Are they gaining insights? Are they learning together? Are they getting better together? That's how you know that your retrospectives are effective, is that a team is able to learn and improve together and consistently. Whether it's small things or big things, it doesn't matter, as long as there's this consistency of we're doing things that are improving our way of work, our way of communicating, our way of interacting, our way of, all of those things.
Awesome. And do you recommend sending notes after retros, even if they're online?
Oh, great question. So I recommend somebody sends the notes, definitely. So what's the reminder? Quick reminder. Hey, everyone, this is what we did in our retro. Here's the action items. You know, what I used to love when we were in person, and teams had scrum boards, and each team had their own board or room or whatever. Often what was awesome is people would like take the retro actions and they would pin them to their scrum board. And so they'd have this visual place where they could see the things the whole time. And so, so now if you've got a Teams chat, pin it to your Teams chat, or your whatever chat mechanisms you use, take the photos and pin them there, or a little, and it doesn't have to be of everything that happened, but maybe it's just the 2 action items or the 1 action item that we're taking out,
Right. And can people be too open during retrospectives, especially around conflict? And if so, is there a better place to deal with conflict than in retros?
Yeah, I think it depends on what the conflict is and what we're trying to achieve. If there's things that are involving the whole team, then we probably want to deal with it as a team, right? But if there's things that are involving only 2 team members or 1 team member and an outsider or something like that, then those you probably don't, the retro is not the place for that, right? Then, those things should be resolved outside of a retro. I think what you want to make sure that retros aren't is this place where somebody's having a conflict with somebody else and they're coming to the retro to like build alliances. And that's not healthy, So you really want to kind of, if you that kind of stuff, you've got to shut down quite quickly and say, hey, this is not the place for that, and this is not the conversation, and then figure out, okay, cool, how do we handle that outside of the retrospective? And those are kind of tricky because there's lots of, you need a lot more context about what's the conflict about and who's involved and all of those things for me to give suggestions about that. But do the ACSM because they've got really great insights on conflict.
Awesome. Well, we're reaching the end of our time, so unfortunately we won't get to all the questions, but we hope we answered some of yours. Thank you, Joe, so much for the presentation. It was really great. All registrants will receive an email with the recording of the webinar, the slides from the webinar, your link to claim your SEU, your SEUs, and a link to the book that Joe talked about throughout her presentation. So thank you so much for attending. Thanks.
Thank you so much, Renee. Have an awesome evening. And thank you, everybody, for joining us tonight or today or this morning or this evening or at midnight or wherever you are in the world. Very much appreciated. Feel free to look me up on LinkedIn and ask me any other questions there.
Thank you.